Well, hello here. We are here with another interesting session. This one talks about investments and scaling in B2B businesses. Now, B2B businesses need guidance, as we all know, in acquiring customers as the solutions cater to a niche audience. They're different from B2C in terms of entry barriers, customer stickiness, and decision making. We have the panel today to enlighten us on B2B businesses, why India and world is at the cusp of B2B revolution, and why investment in scaling B2B businesses is critical for success. Joining us today to discuss this is Mr. Anuj Jain, CTO of Audi. Welcome, Anuj.
at, unlike consumer, which we all today, all of us are consumers of products or services. If you look at it, B2B starts to become a bit more nuanced. So, for example, you can have a small business selling to a small business selling to a large business selling to a small business, all of these combinations. And then you will have all of these combinations happening across different categories. And the complexity that introduces because of all of these combinations that are happening is you realize that a B2B seller and B2B buyer might be unique in a certain sense. So, for example, in a manufacturing B2B buyer, he doesn't buy fashion or apparel, or he doesn't buy electronics or mobile, and he may not buy fresh, for example. So, the B2B buyer in that sense is buying a certain category of products, and when you acquire a customer, you are acquiring that customer primarily for serving those category of customers. That is not true in a B2C. When you acquire a consumer, probably is consuming all kinds of products and services, right? And then again, if you look at various verticals, this analogy will keep on multiplying. So if I leave you with this thought, so B2B, I would say one has to untangle what is the segment of the business seller, business buyer, what is the category, and then how do you start to think of the value proposition that you're providing towards it, which is probably not as complex in B2C.
Yeah. No, good. I think this is a great explanation, and especially in order to anchor people's thought processes that when you actually do a B2C transaction, let's say buying from an Amazon or a Flipkart, there are a bunch of things happening at the back end, and some of it on software and some of it physically goods moving, which are all actually B2B related activities. So that's good. Thiru, you are a very, very specialized type of B2B. So why don't you talk about some of the complexities that you handle, and maybe what's your view of B2B in your land, and how does one kind of think through some of the nuances of your business?
Sure. Thanks for that. So I think as Rahul said, right, India is a very unique when it comes to sort of B2B, right? So there are like in Raghu's speech, he said there are like he's working with 1 million SMEs and MSMEs, right? So I also work with, let's say, for example, 70,000 to 80,000 small kirana stores. So when it comes really to B2B in India,
and maybe first what you do, one-liner.
So we buy vegetables and fruits from farmers and we sell it to retail stores, push carts, makeshift shops, and other supermarkets, etc.
Yes.
Right. So when you see the customer profile for us, when typical B2B compared with other countries, there is like a big player who buys a lot and you help him buy. Right. But here it's like multiple small players who run small businesses, and you are trying to sort of enable them. So when you enable them, the most trickiest part is they have very small business, and the scope of mistakes for you is actually very less. Rahul talked about the complexity on the category front and the consumer front. Let's say he talked about if you take a Flipkart, you onboard a consumer, the consumer buys all categories. So the problem that has to be solved is like you keep increasing the categories and you keep selling to the same set of customers. Whereas in B2B, what happens is we have variability on the supply front also, we have variability on the demand front also. When I say variability on the demand front, I don't have one consumer who will buy everything. I have a kirana store, his need is very different. I have a push cart, his need is very different. I have a supermarket, his need is very different. And these are also not big players. They are like multiple small players. And the complexity is like, keeps multiplying. Right? That is like, that is a unique part of B2B in India. So most of the time when people come to B2B, they think with a mindset that, B2B should be sort of easy because you have a big player buying, you just have to procure and give it to the big player. But in India, it is not the case. You have like, for example, like when I used to work in Taxi for Sure, when Taxi for Sure was sold to Ola, it was doing like 50,000 order trips a day. Currently, we deliver 50,000 orders a day. So it's almost like B2C only. But the complexity is much more than a B2C business, what we largely believe. And also the other thing is like the scope of B2B customers is also limited. For example, I might have, let's say in a place like Bangalore, 1 million kirana stores. So let's say Whereas if you talk about a consumer, that'll be like more than, let's say, Bangalore is like a one crore, 2 crore population, right? So there is a huge difference in the customer base. So the amount of scope for you to sort of do a bad job is very limited. For example, I remember when we dissatisfy a customer with a taxi trip, it's always easy to get him back. But when you do a very bad quality service to a B2B customer, it is impossible to get him back because you're affecting his business, which is his livelihood. So that is one of the key things that we have learned as a B2B company is you have to be very careful with your customer because it's very difficult to win him back. Unlike a consumer who's ready to pardon, it is not his life. Whereas in B2B businesses, these SMEs, this is their life. So they are very, very careful about whom they deal with, how they deal with. So the complexity and the customer service, everything is like increases multi-folds with B2B.
Absolutely. No, good point. Again, I think that draws a good parallel between how a consumer company works versus how a B2B company works. So maybe switching gears a little bit, we keep talking about given when India's innovation cycle is happening, there are at least a few countries where all the things that we are innovating on, at least at a sort of a meta level, people have talked about it in other countries. So maybe we'll go Thiru first this time and then Rahul. Talk a little bit about what you have seen. Have you learned anything from B2B in your space, from any of the other countries or any of the other companies? And how do you adapt that to India? Or I'm sure it's a long story, but give us like some quick thought processes as to how it can be adapted to India for your specific situation.
So I think, Sumita, India is, as I said, very unique. Though there might be multiple parallels in the same sector that we operate abroad, operate in other countries. What we really believe is India is very unique. For example, right, if you take US, Japan, even for the matter China, a lot of vegetables and fruits are transported in temperature controlled. Whereas in India, we can't even think about that, primarily because of two reasons. One is the customer mindset that fresh has to be like not cold stored. The other thing is about the problem of electricity in the country, right? Let's say a retail store. The B2B business is very unique because you have to transport fresh, which is perishable, but you can't use temperature control, right? So you cannot take a sort of direct parallel and apply it. And let's say even there are B2B companies in US and Japan who are trying to do very similar, but their customer size is very different. For example, there is a company called Cisco, which does very similar to what NinjaCart does in US. But let's say every customer of Cisco buys like, let's say, 20 times of what a single customer in NinjaCart buys. Right. So the way their distribution works and the way NinjaCart distribution works is like very, very different. So we have looked at a lot of parallels, figure out what learning can be applied. But there is definitely, we have to, I believe that every company in India has to innovate for India. Right. There are so much of nuances, even across geographies. The way Bangalore works for us is very different for the way Mumbai works. So it's like even between geographies, we sort of find it difficult to copy. For example, Bangalore vegetables are primarily sold through retail stores, which is a Kirana store. Whereas in a place like Bombay, where the retail rental is so costly, no Kirana stores, no vegetables is sold in a shop, which is a permanent establishment. They are either sold in push carts or there is a they put that makeshift shop kind of a thing in a place and they do it. So even between geographies in India, we find a lot of differences. So it becomes more context-driven innovation we need to do for
India. Of course, most intriguing was the last 1 month where you have been telling me, how the supplies in Delhi, depending on the season, happens either from local or from non-local sources, which adds to the complexity of how Delhiites like Rahul eat their tomatoes. But with that note, we'll turn over to Rahul and ask him to allude a little bit to learnings. And you have lived in Singapore, so I know we had done a fairly expansive study of global markets. So maybe quickly allude to that, and then what helped you Indianize it, and what were some of the differences, and what do you see going forward?
See, I think one of the realization that I have had, and I think it accentuated with the starting Moglix when you're traveling to the remote parts of the country, which I never imagined I would be on, traveling from Ranchi to Jamshedpur on a road where still the road is to be built, and these are two major cities in the country, and similar experiences across traveling in different parts of the country. So I think there are a few things what you realize. I think so let me talk about some of the positives. I think the positive is that on most of the areas, we have been fairly unorganized. And I think it played out in consumer very much that if we were to wait for organized offline distribution to happen, I mean, it would probably take 50 years. And some of those things are given in the Western countries that we have traveled and lived through and so on and so forth. And since I worked a lot on wireless communication, I always take a proxy that if India was to wait for 90% landline penetration before mobile was launched in India, we would still be having less than 4%, 5% people talking on a phone, right? So we seem to, as a country, leapfrog, and technology has become a key driver for it, which means that there is not going to be offline organized world for anything. All organized economies for product distribution, product retail are going to start online first. And that is exactly what we observed. There are also structural bottlenecks, which at least played out in our sector a lot more than probably in the Thiru's vertical. But the advent of GST, which meant that suddenly India, which was a very state-oriented distribution models, became a pan-Indian distribution model. So you have sort of the policy framework or the structural framework actually suddenly opening up that you can start to build pan-India distribution models. The third thing, which I would say is a little bit of a tricky thing for India. India is principally heterogeneous at scale. So unlike many other countries, when we take proxies, they are like, if it works in California, it works in Atlanta, it works in Texas, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
In India, the examples Thiru was kind of pointing out, and there is always this that what works in Delhi, there will be a certain adaptation to make it work in Chennai. There will be a certain adaptation to make it work in Calcutta, and so on.
And you say that even though it's the same large company that is your customer, right? So it's different for Thiru because he's dealing with a Kirana store in one place and a push cart in the other place. But even when you're dealing with, let's say, Tata Steel or somebody like that, you still feel like it will be very different.
So I would say that at a company level, I think I don't have that level of complexity what Thiru would have. But I would say the people behavior to change. So one of the biggest thing for us is how do we change behavior of people? And I think my early pitch was and I continue to say that if you're using Flipkart, Amazon, Ola, Uber, Swiggy, Zomato, which have done a fantastic job of bringing India consumer behavior online, then what happens between 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. when you're in office and you want to use all kinds of crappy technology or crappy platforms to order products and get it delivered with no predictability or no sense of time, right? And I think that is the key thing, because even though that people realize it, I mean, making that change behavior is different in Delhi, and how do you make it happen, and different in different parts of the country. And also their entire notion of trust, because typically change in India requires trust to be established. There are obviously back-end infrastructure which needs to be established, but many of those have regional variations which are sometimes beyond logic.
Okay, good. So again, maybe we'll change track a little bit again and talk a little bit. You guys are both technologists at heart, and that's where you all started. I remember Thiru telling me that the first prototype that he showed me, he had programmed the whole thing himself. I don't know how true that was, but he said that the entire demo was 1% driven. But just to go back to that and tell us a little bit about what are some of the winning ingredients of India-focused B2B business in terms of technology, in terms of processes, people. What do you think are the differentiators? And maybe one of the side questions is, both of you are not in a trading business, so to say. You're actually doing substantial value addition. So where does that value addition come from?
So you want me to go
Yeah,
first?
please, Rahul. Yeah, we'll keep switching. Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at it, one of the, again, I think complexity of India is that if you are a product commerce company, you need a interface of technology on customer side, supply side, and you need to build the entire stack of supply chain. Because if you leave any part to be built by a third party or use the existing infrastructure, the entire concept of customer NPS and making sure things happen on time and things happen with the right consistency, so on and so forth, has been poor. And I think it will take a decade for that kind of infrastructure and third party services being built. So I would say the biggest sort of heavy lifting that, therefore, both as an entrepreneur, like, it's exciting. I mean, I had left coding a little bit before starting Moglex, so I had few other team members do that for me. But even if you did that, I think as an entrepreneur, early on, you realize that building a company is a lot more than building the software, because the elements which are broken go far beyond the software piece of it, because you need to make sure that if you have a software on the customer or a supplier side, they actually use the software, you drive that change behavior, and then you have to build the entire supply chain. And in our case, also think about how does the financing happen as part of the process. And that requires building a very strong multi-function, sort of capability organization, if you are able to if you're going to solve the problem end to end. And therefore, I would say technology is maybe 20% piece. It enables you to start thinking scale and deliver it, but there is 80% of the other complexity of a full stack model that one has to solve.
Yeah. Good. Thanks. Thiru, what's your view?
So for us, I'll say that technology played a very crucial role in actually scaling up NinjaCard. So there are a lot of people who started almost the same time that NinjaCard started. In fact, we are the third or the fourth player in the space. But we are able to outperform a lot of people because of our strong focus on technology. Because for us, both the supply and the demand side is extremely fragmented, and the supply chain is also sort of a just-in-time supply chain. For example, whatever I pick up from the farmer at 4 p.m. today, I have to deliver it to the customer 8 a.m. in the morning, and this goods travel over a distance of 200 kilometers. So I have to aggregate goods across 200 kilometers and send it to customers as per their orders, right? So technology plays a huge role in terms of forecasting what to buy, because I cannot take orders and go and buy from my customer, from my partners, because the customer places the order by 8 p.m. and he expects by 8 a.m. So the item moves before an order comes. That means like I start procuring even before my end order comes. So I have to be very good at forecasting, because if I missed forecasting right, I end up with a lot of wastage, because these are perishable items, right? So forecasting plays a very crucial role. It not only in terms of what to buy, in terms of how much vehicles should I plan for, right? How much labor should be there, okay? And also in terms of, let's say, we move vegetables in crates, which are like plastic bins, right? So that is not only going forward, it also goes backward to the farmer for next day procurement. Think like these crates are, at the end of the day operation, these crates are spread across 500, 600 facilities, separated in terms of geographies. And this has to be picked up again by trucks and go back to a common place, and from there go back to the farm to pick the item and come. So all of this is literally not possible without the help of technology, right? In terms of logistics also, right? Maybe we don't even call our customers, we deliver, because we have to move that fast, and even calling introduces service time, because the complexity of business is such that the retailer opens his shop by 6 o'clock and he wants the item by 8 o'clock. So my delivery window is only like sort of 2 hours. In 2 hours, if I have to deliver, if I waste even 5 minutes, the number of customers I can serve comes down. So I become logistically inefficient. So everything from from what to procure, from where to procure, let's say how the logistics works, how the labor works, how the crate planning works, and how the inventory is managed, how the order is taken, everything is driven by technology. If that is not there, I don't think we would have been like even 5% of what we are today. The other biggest thing when it comes to commodities, when you deal with commodities, is pilferage actually, right? Let's say you transport one truck with some 20 crates of tomatoes. Any truck driver can take two tomatoes from every crate, form his own crate, and sell it in the market. And if the market going rate is 20 rupees, he will sell it at 15 rupees. He will sell like hotcakes, right? Because it is. So the point is. Like that, everyone steals 2 tomatoes. By the time 20 kilo crate reaches the customer, it is 15 kilos, right? Because everyone believes they are the only person stealing, and everyone is stealing 2 tomatoes, right? So,
sorry, I'm laughing at Thiru. The example that you're giving is amazing.
So there used to be a movie in Tamil, right? One day will come. If you steal 1 rupee, is it a mistake? The guy will say no. But like some 1 million people steal 1 rupee, is it a problem? Yeah, it's a 1 million rupee problem. That's what happened in the supply chain. And we have deployed tech a lot. To give a small example, right? I cannot keep weighing the crate at every leg of my supply chain. It increases my cost. Right, but when I deliver to the customer, it is 15 kilo. The customer is going to throw the crate back at my face, right? So how do you solve for it, right? We had to deploy innovative technology of saying that how do I track rates, how do I track weights, how do I ensure standardized quality, like large problems to solve. So if someone once asked me like, what is there in Ninja? I buy from farmer and sell it to store. It's like very well like a trading. I said maybe you come with me, I'll take you throughout my supply chain to understand what is it, because as I told, it's about quality also, right? The tomato in your perception is grade A. In a retailer's perception, it could be like grade B, or in someone's perception, it could be grade C. So how do you ensure in a retailer's mind your grade A is grade A, or how do we benchmark the quality of a non-standardized product? Let's say you buy a Motorola mobile, it's a Motorola mobile, right? Even if you buy a Motorola mobile, I buy a Motorola E5 is the same across. Whereas tomato grade A of Ninja Cart and tomato grade A of a market and tomato grade A of a customer might be totally different, right? So how do you ensure that all these quality benchmarks are there set across each customer? How do you communicate? All of that is enabled through sort of technology. So yeah, so technology played a crucial role in scaling of Ninja Cart.
And maybe I'll ask one more question, and in the meantime, you guys should look at. There are a few questions that have come from the audience. So this is my last question, and then we can look at some of the audience questions as well. So, what I have seen from the two of you and many of the entrepreneurs that I have had the fortune of working with is there's a little piece of paranoia that sort of drives all of us, right? We not only love the space and the problem that we are trying to solve, but we almost, are paranoid about solving it to a level where nobody else can even think of something like that, right? And there are probably thousands of budding entrepreneurs sitting out there listening to us today. So two things, for both of you, and we'll go to Rahul. Maybe we'll go to Thiru first now. What is it that makes you an entrepreneur? What's the self-test that you perform on yourself, right? And number two is maybe talk a little bit about some of the problems that you've seen unsolved and which somebody else can go after and create a reasonable company in a B2B or any other space. So Thiru, you want to go first?
Yeah. So it's a very tricky question. So there is no litmus test for an entrepreneur saying that blue or red, right? The point is every day comes to
what makes you tick?
See, I think problem solving is going to be the key for every entrepreneur, right? If you're a seed company, the kind of problems you solve will be different. If you're Series B, Series C, Series D, right? At each stage, the only one thing is that prevail is problem solving. Either you solve a business problem or you solve a people problem, right? But the thing is, you keep solving problems. So every entrepreneur, right, when he comes into the field, he believes that he's going to solve. He likes a problem and he comes and says, okay, I want to solve the problem. But later on, as he grows, he figure out the only problem he solves is people's problem, and the people will solve all the problems which he wanted to solve. So the thing is, so a lot of times I've seen people getting bored out because they say like, hey, I came into the field thinking that I'll solve problem A, but right now I'm so far away from problem A. I'm only solving people's problem, right? So then they lose the enjoyment, right? So there's another conversation also. I think when we had, I told you that as an entrepreneur, as you start working, you have to. The evolution should be that you move away from a player to a coach, right? And I think the more you evolve, you become a coach where you don't play, but you have to enable people to play, train people to play, and give them a platform to play. And if you enjoy doing that, that's when you actually keep evolving as an entrepreneur. More from a question of how do you check yourself as an entrepreneur, I would say how I am growing as an entrepreneur. I feel like the more and more I enjoy other people's victory in my company, I think I am growing. So that's a test I keep doing.
Okay, so from moving from a player to becoming a coach, and not, the players don't necessarily make great coaches, but that's where the dilemma is.
Correct. The point is right. Let's say when you are a player, let's say you are playing cricket, you hit a ball with a bat, it gives you joy, right? But when you are a coach, you just see a player. Let's say if you are a coach and you have a player who's performing well, you will not largely initially find the enjoyment of that win, because you are not the guy who's winning. There is someone who's winning on behalf of you, and you have to enjoy that, right? The moment you develop the mentality to enjoy that win, is primarily you start growing actually.
So maybe we'll switch to Rahul on that question and then come back and ask you about a few other adjacent areas. Rahul, you want to?
So I think I'll make 2 points. So I think it's a very hard question, because I think to say what I think Thiru and I enjoy quite a bit of stuff, and with many of the Excel entrepreneurs, but I feel all of them are different, and there is probably a founder problem fit as well. Yeah. Or problem space entrepreneur fit as well. I'm not sure if I would solve the fresh problem the way Thiru would solve and he would be passionate about, and I don't know whether he'll be passionate about solving. So I think there is a clear sort of a founder problem or product market space kind of a fitment as well, which needs to happen. But I think principally entrepreneurs, I feel, are dreamers, doers, learners in my mind. So they have a dream that they really believe in. Second, they are doers because they are going to commit to it. And I think unlike most other people, because I think our education system, many of the times what we learn is we sort of take other people's advice or what they recommend as a path, and we just continue to tread along. Right? Entrepreneur is actually going to be a different path, because everything is not going to be a sort of upward curve to the right, what we happily see in many companies or successful companies, so on and so forth. So there will be all of those skeptics who will be there, and ups and downs and various kind of things. So if you got to choose this path, dreamer, doer, and doer, where you are betting on your dream yourself. I mean, you can't, if it fails, you can't say like, okay, because somebody else told me and that's why. I mean, like that sort of stuff has to go away, and an entrepreneur has to throw it away, because that is critical for an entrepreneur to truly become an entrepreneur. And then learning is, I think, a very, very important element, because you will get disrupted. You will have competition happening, different ways to approach a problem. All of those things will be happening. I mean, just like Thiru, we were not the first. We were probably the third player. Maybe third is a lucky number. Subrata, it seems like both of us are in that zone. So, but yeah, you got to go about.
Excel/Erasmic was my third attempt at entrepreneurship.
So there might be some elements there. And I think to the point which Thiru made around the player and a coach, and I think this is something that evolves, but I think it's part of the learning as well. And I think I continue to love being a player, but you have to sort of embrace the fact that if you can be, it's very difficult to take a player away from your, I mean, that from your heart. So I make sure that I have 20% opportunity to also be a player. And while I can be a coach maybe 80% of the time, and I need that 20% because I feel
backseat driver.
Yeah, I mean, I can't be 100% coach. I mean, it just I'll become a VC, and I knew that I cannot be a VC.
Don't abuse me. Okay. No, but I think one of the things that I learned along this process as being an entrepreneur, and I also still feel like I am an entrepreneur because I obviously, Axel was sort of born out of a few of us wanting to change the way VCs work in India. And hopefully we continue to do that for the next few decades as well. But not to give up. I think you talked about that because there'll be a lot more bad days in an entrepreneur's life than good days, right? And it's very easy because it's so lonely. It's very easy to turn away and say, I tried and I give up, right? But nobody cares, right? Because it's your own dream, and you are the only one who can really get up tomorrow morning and make sure that you have a different, road to get to. Maybe very quickly, I think we are probably short on time now. So maybe Rahul, you go first. Any open spaces that you think our listeners can jump into or think about?
So I would just leave the remark that we are, I think the entire space is 99% open. There is less than 1% of the space that is taken. So in everything that you think about,
that's true for most spaces in India. Maybe not 1% or maybe 10%, right? But still it is open. No, I agree with you.
And I think the question becomes is you'll have to find that. I mean, B2B itself, as I spoke about, there are like 100 odd combinations.
Yeah.
And probably 4 combinations somebody is attempting to solve. So 96 of those combinations, maybe not even a relevant company is trying to solve.
Thiru, anything in terms of your thinking?
So I think as Rahul said, 98% there is a lot more thing to be solved. Primarily on the supply chain front, I believe that's a lot more challenges which is yet to solve. I think each industry you take, the supply chain in that industry is very unique, and there are a lot more solutions that has to be built very specific to the supply chain. So I think a lot of work still has to be done to build a robust infrastructure where we bring in a lot more efficiency in moving the goods in India. I think on the supply chain front, the small truck, big truck, a lot more channels of logistics has to be built in India. So I think there's a lot of scope for a lot of people to get into this and play actually.
Got it. No, great. Thanks a lot. I think those are all the questions I had. Maybe Gunjan, how do we do this now? Should we turn it over to the audience? There are a few questions here. We could try to address those. What's the next step?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions here. I'm guessing we haven't taken the ones that we already have the chat. If you want, I can take them on your behalf.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the questions is, for a B2B company expanding from India to gain international customers, what key factors are to be considered?
So maybe Rahul, you should take that because you have at least thought about it, experimented on it a little bit. So why don't you go for that one?
So I think there are 2 important things that is as part of that when you start to think of India. So I think given the heterogeneous nature of India and how the problems have to be solved in India, one has to be firstly sure why is that template relevant for the other markets that you're looking to apply. Because I think unlike many other spaces where you have a US or China as a starting point and you say that, okay, the rest of the world is behind and I can apply that template to other markets, I think many places we might be behind in evolution. So I think it's very important that you apply that first principle thinking. Why is this value proposition valid? And if I need to make adaptation for those countries, I will make sure that I do those adaptations before I launch into those markets. Second, I think it will also be just like I think the people point Thiru was touching a little bit. It will mean that as an organization, you will have to start to change the way you start to think of people, building teams. There will be cultural differences. There will be sort of business relationships differences, so on and so forth. So you need to make sure that if you are going international, you are setting yourself with the right market understanding, people understanding, and really there to win. I mean, don't be another Me Too player. Just like in India, you wouldn't want to be a Me Too player. Don't be a Me Too player if you are entering an international market. You have to go all in, and you have to make sure all of those ingredients you're at least thinking about. Not all of them may be present on day one, but you're thinking about and you're making sure you line up those.
Good.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Time for another question that says, how do you consolidate your position and ensure your customer sticks to you, irrespective of the person in the decision-making role?
So again, I mean, it's probably relevant to both, but Thiru, you want to go for it first?
Yeah, so actually this question is different for different segments. For example, I think the question is largely on for big organization where there is a procurement guy who is buying and there is this thing. So we traditionally as a company, we don't try to work with companies where I have to daily depend on a procurement guy to make a decision, right? Because I think there are a lot of procurement guys in India who are corrupt. So they don't stay corrupt, they corrupt our organization also. So
Thiru, you can't say that. That's an XXX word.
Thiru, maybe the Horeca segment is probably one where this is relevant. Maybe
even in big supermarket chains, right? We have tried working with them. It's very difficult, right? They will say your quality is bad, but they will get their vendor whose quality is like very, very bad. But he'll be paying 5% of that back to the guy.
Okay, so figure out ways to.
Yeah, there is a separate long conversation, but if I was to take that question, I think the key question, I think goes back to the value question, value delivery. I think in a large organization where multi-decision maker, so the key element is when you have multi-decision maker versus single decision maker, and if the multi-decision maker, the decision maker changes, how do you make sure that you still remain in the game and you remain relevant for the procurement there? I think if the value delivered is very well established, in a multi-decision maker, getting in is difficult, but getting out is even more difficult. And I think that is the key element. In a single decision maker setup, I think getting in, getting out is far easier. And then you start to look at the agency or agent problem, as Thiru was speaking about. Some of them will have the agent problem, but there are enough market out there which does not necessarily suffer from that problem.
And overall, I think there are obviously as VCs we keep asking about what's the stickiness, and depending on the business problem that you're solving, you could actually build a few things that makes it sticky, and that sort of transcends not only the customer but you being or not being there in that company, right? I mean, tomorrow let's say somebody acquires your company. The acquirer would want to make sure that the solution is reasonably sticky. Otherwise, why should they pay good money to buy something which the customer may move on to? Right. Right. So, and there are few approaches that we look at. So we can talk about it maybe on a more specific basis.
Well, thank you so much for that. We do have more questions, but unfortunately, I'm afraid that we're running out of time. So this is that part where I will have to say it was a wonderful session. We got a lot of insights about, B2B sort of that a lot of people probably did not have, and you were able to answer a lot of questions in a mere 60 minutes. So kudos to you guys on doing that. I will have to say thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Thiru, for being here. And thank you, Subrata, for being such a great moderator.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.